don't know if you guys realize this, but a lot of restaurants and fast food places are now asking for your name so that you don't get it mixed up with somebody's order and so people will pay attention. It's a great opportunity to witness to other people.
Yes.
Hey, I'd like to have a 2-pack of the Cinnabon Delights, please.
2 packs of the Cinnabon Delights. Anything else?
Nope, that'll be it.
That'll be it. We're here to go.
For here.
Can I have your name?
You can. Jesus Christ is Lord.
Okay.
Say it nice and loud. I want to make sure I hear it. I'm way in the back over there, okay?
Right.
All right.
Okay. 110.
There you go.
Be right up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, all you got to do is sit back and let them witness for you. Pretty cool.
Jesus Christ is Lord. Jesus Christ is Lord.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's a true statement right there. That's a true statement. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Right.
Denying truth doesn't change the truth. It just makes you a denier of truth. It just makes you ignorant to truth. 500 years ago, people thought the earth was flat. Did that make it flat just because they all believed it? No, it was still round. Even in Isaiah 40, Isaiah told us some 3,500 years ago, the circle of the earth. Yet 500 years ago, people thought if they sailed out on the sea, they'd fall off the edge of the earth. Was the earth ever flat? Even though most of the earth thought it was, most of the world thought it was flat? No, it was still round. Did their denial of truth change the truth? Not one bit. Today, billions of people deny the existence of God. Does that change the truth? Does that mean He doesn't exist because billions say He doesn't? Not one bit. It just makes them ignorant to the truth. God is still true, whether you believe it or not. God sent His only Son, Jesus Christ, to save the world from their sins, to save people from hell, to save people from the grave and from the flesh. That's good news. Just because they're denying the truth, does that make it untrue? No, it just makes them condemned already, according to the words of Jesus Christ in John 3:18. Condemned already. They've fallen after another gospel. Muhammad thought he was talking to the angel Gabriel in that dark cave, who was telling him another gospel. Keep in mind, Lucifer was kicked out of heaven because he wanted to be worshipped more than God. He found a way to be worshipped. It's called Islam. Paul said in Galatians 1, if we or an angel from heaven come to you with any other gospel, may they be forever accursed. And here came Muhammad with another gospel, thinking it was from an angel from heaven. Romans 10:17 says, so then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Hearing by the word of God. You know what? People, when you stand before God, if you've refused to believe, if you've heard the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ all your life, but you refuse to believe, you're still going to stand before Him one day. And in that moment that you do, you're going to wish you would have had a change of heart. All those times the good news was presented to you. You're going to wish you would have said, okay, tell me more. Help me learn to believe. Tell me what I need to do to accept this Jesus you speak of. That's good news, Kevin. You've heard nothing but good news in this video. Jesus loves you. He loves you so much, He laid down His life that you may have everlasting life. It's a free gift. But just like any gift, you have to reach out and accept it. Stop living in denial. Stop living in the darkness. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Our heart, which is deceitful, works against us. We need to trust in God the Father. Psalm 118 verse 8 says, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put your confidence in man. Truth is truth, people. Jesus Christ is that truth. He did die to save you. And the good news is that we know how we can have everlasting life with God the Father, and it's through Jesus Christ the Son. Anyone who denies Christ will be denied by God the Father when you stand before Him. No man knows no greater love than this, that He laid down His life for His friends. And then what did He do? He laid down His life for us, His friends. I love you, man. And I would lay down my life for you. You know why? Because I know if I died, I'm going to go see my Father in heaven. I'm going to rejoice for eternity with God the Father. With my sacrifice, you might see the love of Christ in me. I would do that for you, man, and I think you know it. That's love. Christ did this for you and me. And I'll do whatever I need to do to help lead you out of that darkness. I'm a servant following after Christ. I'm preaching the same message, that Christ is the only way to God the Father. Of course, I'm bringing division as well. A student is no greater than his master. Christ is my master, my Savior, my King. I will follow after Him. They hated Him. They crucified Him. They'll do the same to me. My heart and my soul is prepared for that. I'm okay with that.
So what's my take on the whole Kent Hovind situation? I think the whole thing is ridiculous. It's sad. It's pathetic that a man who, maybe he didn't do everything right. I don't get behind any man and say that he does everything right. There's no man out there that I have ever found on this earth as a Christian serving God who does everything right. There's some men who are closer to the truth than others, who are doing things better than others. But in Kent Hovind's situation, it's like, it doesn't make any sense why he should be in jail for 8 years, and now they want to add another 10 to 20 years to this ridiculous sentence, which doesn't seem to be for anything legitimate. I mean, they warned him about paying the taxes the correct way or whatever it was, or moving money out of the account, and they said he didn't deal with it right or whatever, and so then they lock him away for 8 years. And now they're accusing him of mail fraud or something, and they want to lock him away for another 10 to 20 years. Yet we have men out there who have stolen the innocence of children. The innocence of children, who have raped children, who only go to jail for 2.5 years. They might get a 5-year sentence for raping a child. I've been through this process. And then they serve 2.5 years for raping a child. Yet Kent Hovind didn't really do anything wrong, but they wanted to say he was doing something wrong, so they've locked him away for 8 years and now another 10 to 20 years. This is absolutely ridiculous. You have men who rape children, and then they're allowed to go on and get married and have a family and have a life. Yet here's a man who, through his ministry, helped countless people like myself to see why evolution, why living a life without God is wrong, why it's wicked. And, through his ministry, that had a big impact on my conversion to Christ. I was a scoffer, an atheist, did drugs and alcohol, and just didn't care about anybody but myself. And upon running into a couple different Christians, the first Christian that I talked to really pointed me in the direction of Jesus and said, Jesus is God and everything like that. So I started praying, if you're God, show yourself to me. Make it clear to me. If you're really God, make it clear to me. And then after that, I ended up at, about 10 months later, at a conference, and somebody in the conference mentioned how Jesus is God and how all glory goes to Jesus. And I got upset about that. Like, why should they even talk about their faith at this business conference? That doesn't make sense. And the people that were with me happened to be creationist Christians. And then they, the one man argued with me and said, well, what do you believe if you don't want people talking about Jesus and saying he's God? What is it that you believe? And I said, evolution. He said, you really think you came from a rock millions of years ago, that a rock eventually evolved into slime and then became soup, and the soup came alive and creatures climbed out of the soup and eventually evolved into people? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And this was a man who was an engineer. He knew, for you to have a fully functioning body, you have to have that created all at once by a creator. You can't just have things evolve over time. It doesn't make sense to say that things just evolve over time, over chance, random processes. And so he argued these different points of evolution with me. How can you get life from non-life? How could there be, that's a scientific law. You can't get life from non-life. Absolutely ridiculous that they teach all the children this. They teach them the religion of atheism in all these public schools. It has, gone that way over time, that now they're teaching all the children the religion of atheism. So why is it that they're even allowed to do that? That doesn't make sense to me one bit. If you want to teach atheism in the public schools, then you also need to teach about Christianity. And you need to teach about, Hinduism, teach about Islam, teach about every religion if you're going to teach atheism in the public school. Because they're destroying the lives of children and young people. And I made a lot of bad decisions as a teen because they taught me there was no God. You can basically do whatever you want if you can get away with it, because there's no God to be accountable for. We're only here for a short time. You just do whatever you want. Once you die, it's all over. There's no heaven. There's no hell. There's no consequences. You just do whatever you want. Basically, that's what I was taught. That's what, thousands, millions of children all over America are being taught every day. And when I talk to other people about this whole situation, Muslim, Christian, Jew, because the majority of people in America do believe there's a God. Whether or not it's the God of the Bible doesn't matter. They do believe there is a God. And they have no right to hijack the public schools and indoctrinate everybody's children into evolution, into atheism, when the majority of people do believe there is a God. But they just have no clue what their kids are being taught in school. So because Kent Hovind and his ministry shed light on the fact that they are indoctrinating all the children in the public schools into atheism, and because he preached so much about this, these people that I happened to be with that day, when I was searching for God and searching for answers, happened to argue with me about it and then point me in the direction of his ministry. And then after looking at the information he had, watching, his DVDs, it made perfect sense. You're never going to get enough mutations that you're going to have one creature change into another creature. This is just a theory. This is Darwin's theory. And everybody who wants to believe Darwin's theory should read the book called What Darwin Didn't Know. Because there's a lot of things Darwin didn't know about cells. He didn't know about the body. And it's just foolish that they're relying on this pseudoscience from the 1800s when we have so many advances in science, in knowledge, in technology, and we know that life can't come from non-life. It's foolishness that they're teaching this bad theory from a couple hundred years ago. Why are they teaching them that? And it teaches racism, that some people are less evolved than others, and so they're not as well, they're not as well bred. They're bad. And what does it say about people with special needs? I have a special needs child. I find that very offensive that they teach that some people are more fit than others, the survival of the fittest. That's a bunch of garbage. And they shouldn't be teaching that to children. But because Kent Hovind shed light on this and, shared the truth and was brave enough to do that, I became a Christian. It wasn't just his information, but I ended up studying out other creation resources and just checking it all out over the course of a year, along with reading my Bible. And eventually one night I called upon Jesus and accepted him as my Savior. Where would I be without his ministry? I a horrible life of no hope, of misery? Why are people depressed? Why are people suicidal? Why do people have all the problems that they have today? Because they have no hope. Because we're allowing these institutions to steal away the hope of people and teach everyone the religion of atheism. And that's not fair, you know. And somebody, Kent Hovind, was willing to stand up against it and say, you should not be indoctrinating all these children into the religion of atheism, into the religion of evolution, because it's a theory, it's not a fact. It's not observable. We can't go back millions of years ago and see whether or not a Big Bang happened and whether or not dinosaurs lived before people. That's a theory. That's one side of, you know, of the coin. Let's look at the other side of the coin as well and see that there's evidence that people did live with dinosaurs, because people, you know, people made paintings, they made carvings that looked like dinosaurs before the bones of the dinosaurs were even discovered in the 1800s. How would they have any idea what a dinosaur looked like before the 1800s when the bones were discovered if they had never lived with them? You know, there's so much information out there that they're suppressing by only teaching atheism and evolution to the children. And they're robbing them of hope. Because, you know, had I known that there was a God, that the Bible was true, I would have lived a different life. I would not have got caught up in drugs and alcohol and made a lot of bad decisions that I made. And that's why, you know, all these girls are making these bad decisions, because they don't know that there's any grounding for the Bible, that there's evidence for the Bible. And they're being taught by their teachers, by the TV, by the magazines, by the newspapers, that millions and millions of years ago, you know, apes turned into people, and there's no God. You know, the Bible's just a fairy tale. What's a fairy tale is that life can come from non-life, and over millions of years, animals can turn into people. That's a fairy tale. And I think the whole situation is basically because Kent Hovind was willing to stand up against that and say this is wrong. And he was having such an influence on so many people like myself, and turning their life from absolute trash and garbage into something beautiful that could be used for God, that he was basically targeted. And, you know, now he's suffering and has been suffering. Sore throat, it's hard to even talk, but so basically I believe that's the whole issue here, that he's been targeted, he's been, you know, basically beaten up because he was shedding light on the truth here, and, you know, they've locked him away for 8 years, and now they're looking at another 10 to 20 years, which is absolutely sick. To take a man away from his family that long, away from his wife that long, it's disgusting. It's sad that they're able to do that to him when he really didn't do anything wrong to hurt anybody. In fact, he was helping a lot of people, helped me. And there's a lot of other people out there that have the same testimony, that because of his creation science evangelism videos, they were saved or they were influenced. Some of my good friends were saved through his ministry. So the whole situation is very sad, and I think we as Christians need to pray for him and look for ways that we can be a help to him. A lot of the pastors have abandoned him and said, you know, he should have just done everything, you know, right according to the laws, and because he didn't, you know, we should just abandon him. But I don't believe that's the truth. And it's different if he was embezzling from a church or something like that, where he was actually stealing money from people and hurting people. That's one thing. And I wouldn't support a preacher who did that, you know, at all. I wouldn't go to bat for him at all if that was what they did. But he had a parachurch ministry, which you know, out of all the church ministries out there, and I disagree with the corporate churches and the fact that they want to push tithing on every person and tell everybody, you owe us tithes, when in the New Testament it says God loves a cheerful giver, and that a man should give willingly, not of necessity, not grudgingly, not because they have to, but because they want to. That's the way that giving should be done. And I also believe giving was done only to missions and to the poor. But as far as the parachurch ministries, I would consider them as missions and should be supported, because they are the ones that are going out and preaching the gospel all over the place. They don't know that they're going to be able to get a job. Like, for example, think Jesus or Muhammad. That's one ministry. I don't agree with everything they teach, but I'm just saying, for example, these men who are preaching so hard against Islam would have a harder time finding a job than, your average Christian man because of the stances that they're taking. Kent Hovind would have had a hard time trying to find a job in the secular world when he's preaching so hard against evolution and, traveling all over the place preaching against evolution. So his ministry, I believe, was fine to be, funded through donations. He never told everybody, you have to tithe to me. You're required to tithe to me. And that's one thing where I believe the parachurch ministries are correct, and they're blessed in doing that because they let people give willingly however they, see fit to give to them. Unlike many of these corporate churches where they're telling people, you are commanded to tithe to me. And some of them, like Creflo Dollar, will even tell the people, you're not going to heaven because you're not tithing to me. And that's really sick. And it hurts families, especially the poor, and especially the families that have a lot of kids. For them to demand that they tithe off of what little that they have is sick and wrong. Because in the New Testament, we find that every man gave as he was able. And the giving went to missions, and it went to the poor people within the house churches. So I'm not against the parachurch ministries, and I'm not saying that that we shouldn't fund them. That's the thing. I'm saying that we shouldn't fund corporate churches who are demanding tithes from people and even claiming that people won't go to heaven unless they pay tithes. There's something sick and wrong about that, and it's hurtful to families. I myself have been hurt by that system. But nonetheless, I haven't given up my faith in Jesus because some men out there are using Jesus in a wicked way. The Catholic Church is a perfect example of an institutional church who uses Jesus in a wicked way and hurts people in the name of Jesus. But does that mean that Jesus isn't the truth? No. Jesus is the truth. And there's a solid foundation for our faith, which Kent Hovind was a big instrument used by God in helping people to see the creation science information, that there's so much information out there that supports the Bible. The fossils are something that supports the Bible, that supports the biblical flood. The fault lines, the Grand Canyon, all show us that there was a flood at one time on the earth, not millions and millions of years, that we're here for no purpose and no reason, and we can basically do whatever we want until we die. He's given hope to a lot of people and changed a lot of lives for the better. I can attest to that myself. So it's very sad to see him in this situation, but I believe that God uses every evil thing for good. You even look at Paul. Paul was a great servant of God. He was known as the greatest missionary to ever have lived, and he spent a lot of his time in jail. So I don't think that a man going to jail necessarily is saying that, they were doing something wrong. And it might come very soon that there's a day where any pastor who's preaching hard against sin will end up in jail. So, I think we're just coming upon the beginning of this very difficult times for Christians in America, which is very sad that we have to live through this, but God has a reason for it. Even the people who went through the Holocaust, you can read their testimonies and see how God strengthened them and helped them through it and helped them to cope, even when they were being persecuted and, they were being killed and they were being cast down. So that's what it seems like the whole situation is, that, the government is instituting a religion. And they always, the atheists always want to say, separation of church and state. You can't teach the Bible in school. Well, then you can't teach evolution in school. You can't tell kids there is no God. If I can't tell them there is a God in school, and I can't tell them that Jesus is God in school, then you shouldn't be able to tell them that there is no God. And you shouldn't be able to tell them that you think millions of years ago an explosion happened and creatures evolved up out of the ocean and turned into animals, which turned into people. If that's just a theory, that's just your belief system. Those are your beliefs, and you should keep them out of the schools. And, that's something that Hovind was a big, he played a big important role in exposing that truth, that shouldn't be taught in the schools. And over the last few decades, it's become commonplace for them to teach that in the schools. And in my generation, they taught it very, very hard. And you know what we saw? 5 suicides by the time I graduated. And this is just continuing to go on, that there's been, rampant suicide, rampant teenage pregnancy, school shootings. All these things are happening since they began teaching evolution to a great degree in the last few decades. They took the Bible out of the classroom. They won't let the children learn that there is a God, but they're teaching all the children that there isn't a God. How do they have the right to teach them there isn't a God? They shouldn't have that right. If I can't tell them that there is a God in the school, they have no right to teach them that there isn't a God. That's absolutely ridiculous, because they are implementing a religion in the public school, and it's atheism. And because Hovind went against that, and he exposed the truth, he's suffering for it. He's been jailed for 8 years and is looking at another 10 to 20 years on really trumped up, silly, trumped up charges that nobody else would be serving. There's, no way that anybody else would be serving time, this much time for, what they've jailed him for. It makes absolutely no sense, the things that they've done to him. But in light of the scripture, we can see that God works all things together for good to those who love him. And Hovind has been able to reach people in jail and disciple people in jail. So God has a reason for it. Even though, when we look at the Christian's life, especially when they're suffering so greatly, it's like, where are you, God? Why aren't you intervening? And, God has a reason for allowing that suffering, for the betterment of that Christian, for the furtherance of the gospel, which was always the case with Paul, that when he was bound, when he was imprisoned, it was for the furtherance of the gospel. And I believe that's, why God has him there, so that he can be reaching people, not only, preaching to them, giving them a DVD that they can watch for a couple hours, but living amongst them. Corrie ten Boom was a woman who, when she came out of the Holocaust, she was a survivor. She accidentally survived because they accidentally stamped her paper that she could be released instead of stamping it that she was supposed to be exterminated. So she got released. And once she was released, she had a home that she made for the other people who were getting free from the camps so that they could recover. And she would spend time with them, teaching them about God and recovering with them. Well, then when the camps were completely done away and the camps were, done, there was all these poor Jews, and she wanted to tell them about Jesus, but she said it wouldn't be enough to just go and preach to them about Jesus. She instead chose to go live among them as, a poor person, and living among them and telling them about Jesus had such a greater impact than just preaching Jesus to them. So, that could be very well the reason why God has him living among these people in the jail system, where it is greatly needed that somebody preach the gospel to the people in the jails. So that could be why God's making him live among them, But that's my take on it. I've gone through a lot of personal suffering with my child, who has cerebral palsy and autism. He has a very low mentality, about a 4-month-old mentality. And, it's expected that it's not going to change much the rest of his life. And to somebody from the outside looking in, they would say, God has failed you. Why isn't your child healed? Why isn't everything all better? If God loves you, why didn't he make it all the pain go away? Why didn't he stop the suffering? But to the Christian who reads the Bible, who loves Jesus and walks closely with Jesus, they know that this is God giving us the fellowship of the sufferings of Christ. And it says how, we live out the life of Christ in our body. And that was something that the Christians who went through the Holocaust, like Corrie ten Boom, when the Nazis stripped her of all of her clothes and she had to stand naked before the Nazi guards, she said, well, this is horrible. God, why? And then she remembered Jesus on the cross, naked. And she said, well, if that's what you went through for me, is it really that much for you to ask me to go through this? So it's to conform us to the image of Christ. That's what the Bible says, that through sufferings, God conforms us to the image of Christ. And we have more compassion. We have more love for people because of what we go through. And I can say that personally. Like the Bible says, that people who don't fear God because they have no changes. Nothing changes in their life, and that's why they don't fear God. But people like me who have been through a life of suffering, who have seen friends commit suicide, who have been on their deathbed before, who deal with a special needs child day in and day out, because of that suffering, they draw nigh to God. They draw closer to God, and they get an understanding of Christ that other people who don't have a hard life don't have. So, that's the other thing. Just because a Christian's suffering doesn't mean God is a failure. God has failed them. God doesn't love them and doesn't care about them. It means that God is willing to set them apart, work in their life, and draw them closer to Him through the sufferings, and bring them to a level in their Christian walk that other people will never get to. So that's my take on it, what happened with Hovind, why he's going through this suffering, why God allows it. God is still good no matter what, and has a reason for everything that He does. And it's, some things we're going to learn about in heaven, how God used them for His glory and for goodness.
LA, great to have you. It's great to have you on the live feed. Great to see you. This is such a fascinating subject for me, LA. Wow, it is like a little hot potato for me. I just can't get enough of this stuff. I think biblical sources and archaeological sources and all roads seem to head to the same place. What is going on? This is in the public mindset. Everybody's interested in this, LA.
Well, let's take a look at this. This was so great about television because I had show and tell all day long. But look at this. This is a shot. I took this photograph. It's actually part of our calendar that we sell. Mm-hmm. This is from Sacsayhuaman. I'll come a little closer.
Sure, I can see. This
is Sacsayhuaman in Peru. The elevation is about 12,000 feet. And here's the deal. It begs the question when we look at some of the stones here. I'll come in a little closer.
Oh yeah.
These are megalithic stones. Some of these stones weigh upwards of 120 tons each. And it begs the question, how does a culture, a Bronze Age Neolithic culture, 3,500 years ago or older, that only have copper chisels, somehow create these angles, polygonal angles in the stones, and do it with such precision. Now, here's another shot. This is from Ollantaytambo. Same thing. It's all that's left of it. Mm-hmm. It's called the Temple of the Sun.
Oh yeah, pink granite. Yep.
And it's like, how does a culture that only has copper chisels somehow create polygonal shapes out of megalithic stones, some of them weighing 110, 120 tons each? How is it possible? And remember, andesite is about 7.0 on a Mohs hardness scale, very hard. Mm-hmm. And even if you harden a chisel, it begs the question, why not just make a nice square block like most people would do? No. Sure. They're making angles, bizarre angles. And sometimes they'll actually make little curves in the middle of the rock. You'll just see this, and all of a sudden it'll curve like that. Are you kidding me? I mean, even in wood, it'd be very difficult, but we're talking andesite stone. And archaeologists, if they're really honest, yeah. and some of them are, if they're really honest, they have to admit, otherwise it's just intellectual dishonesty, that they have no clue as to how Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, any of these sites were actually built. There's theories, well, somehow they melted the rock. Somehow they were able to lift 120-ton megalithic stones from 40 to 50 miles away, at 2,000 feet lower in elevation, drag them up to the site, and somehow fit them. How the heck is that done? Yeah. And what we see is there's nothing left of the builders, James. There's no signature of the builders. There's no tools left behind. We're looking at a technology that even in modernity, we would be hard-pressed to duplicate the site that we see at Sacsayhuaman. And yet, whoever the builders were, they were playful. They seem to be able to construct what we see at Sac Sibamon and do it very, very easily. And that's why, look, there's other sites. I'm trying to find one here.
That's the key word, though. That is the key word, LA, playful. They were very, very playful.
Here's what I mean. Look, this is in Cusco, which is right below Sac Sibamon. Look at the curve right here. Look at the curve of the stone.
Incredible.
How is that possible? Look at it. And then look above it, and you can see this is from the original builders. Let me get a pen here. This is from the original builders right here, this area.
Sure.
And then when we go above it, here, this is what I have affectionately, with all due respect, termed Inca slop. It is completely different.
Incas.
It's completely different than what we see here. The building in the lower course is the original building, and it's done with incredible precision. Look at the joints. Look at the joints. And then here, and by the way, this rock is quarried from miles away and then brought to the site, where the rock here, affectionately known as Inca slop, is indigenous rock found in the area. Mm-hmm. And then above on this side, we see the colonial masonry. So we have a real disparity between this original site here, the original construction, what I affectionately call the Inca slop, and way up in here, the colonial. There are three different types of building. The building here is by far more intricate, more precise, mm-hmm. more accurate, and these walls, James, they don't just stand like straight up like this.
Yeah, they're angled in.
They're angled in, and now it becomes even more complex. And so, whoever the builders were, they had technology that even in modernity we'd be hard pressed to duplicate. They had technology which is able to do this, and even in the present day, we'd have a very difficult time creating this. Look, I've shown these pictures to architects and engineers, and they kind of, laugh nervously when they see them,
sure.
and rightfully so, because they don't have a clue as to how it was done.
Not only that, LA, we have a difficulty accepting that they did it. Never mind a difficulty understanding it. We have a difficulty just accepting this stuff. I actually stood with another engineer, and I've got a mechanical engineering qualifications, as does he, and we both looked at this, LA, at that Saxy Woman wall, and we looked at that exact tilt that you're talking about. And we reckon that they were tilting it inwards to compress the stone for engineering purposes of keeping that all in together. It was a way of self-tightening the stone. And that is such incredible skills to do that. Such incredible skills just to make the polygonal wall itself, but to do it in 3D, angling and...
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
It's unprecedented.
And this is what, you talk about Nephilim, to get it back on track.
Mm.
This is what we have come to call Nephilim architecture.
Sure.
This is what we call it. Fallen angel technology, Nephilim architecture.
That's
Nephilim
sort of architecture
for all these different sites. Because James, really, we've only got two paradigms that I'm aware of that a person can. Well, actually three. You've got mainstream archaeology, which will tell us that somehow a race of people just showed up with this kind of advanced technical knowledge and in the Neolithic age and magically carved the stones.
Sure.
Then you've got the ancient astronaut theorists who claim that we were visited, thousands of years ago by ancient astronauts from the Pleiades, Zeta Reticuli, and it's their technology where they levitated the stones, floated the stones, and that's their particular paradigm. The third one, which is the paradigm that I embrace, is that we're looking at fallen angel technology, and the offspring of these fallen angelic beings are the Nephilim. When the fallen angels see the women of earth, they desire them, and they have sex with them. And the offspring of that is known as the Nephilim. And we believe, when I say we, myself and my colleagues believe, that many of these sites, Baalbek in Lebanon, Stonehenge in England, your neck of the woods,
sure.
The great stones in Karnak in France, some of the mound builders that we see in Ohio, in the Americas, and other places, for instance, America's Stonehenge, I have come to call this Nephilim architecture because I think that's what it is.
LA, I've got something to tell you after the show. I'll allude to it. I've got some stuff for you about Nephilim architecture in the British Isles. That's including Britain, Ireland, and a little bit of France as well. And I know you're maybe coming to Europe, but It's a little bit of research I'm working on at the moment. I'm totally with you. I definitely think that all these ancient megalithic structures should now be labeled Nephilim architecture. There's such a unifying design plan in them all. Maybe just go back to Peru, because I know you got some artifacts there. In Peru, although we have the megaliths in Peru, we have a lot of these skulls as well. And this is one of the most exciting things as well, because this brings it into the realm of archaeology. And this brings it into option 3 that you talked about, that we have some sort of a physical race that was descendants of. So let's talk about the Nephilim skulls, because this gives it some sort of content, and it's like this is an eye opener for anybody.
Well, let's start with one of the larger ones. This skull came out of the Paracas History Museum in Paracas, Peru. Paracas is located on the west coast of Peru. It's a beautiful place. I've been there 3 times. Hope to come back probably this year. There's a fly buzzing around here. But check this guy out.
Oh my God! Look at this.
Let me get my hand out of the way here.
This is a replica.
This is a cast that Joe Taylor of the Mount Blanco Museum made.
It's incredibly detailed.
Well,
you can see the fractures on the skull what do you call them? The fractures?
Sagittal suture.
Sagittal sutures, yeah.
Now, what's interesting is with this particular skull, and by the way, this skull has about 30% more cranial capacity, more brain capacity, 30% than a normal human skull. A normal human skull, this is the frontal plate, should have a sagittal suture running like this. This is the frontal suture that we see here.
Sure.
It should have a sagittal suture that runs from here back to the occipital plate, which is this plate back in here, and you can see the suturing there.
Yeah.
There should be a suture that connects the 2 plates. There isn't. And this is one of the anomalies that we see in some of the Paracas skulls, where there's a complete absence of a sagittal suture. What's interesting is this debate, James, has been running since at least 1842, when academics began to look at the elongated skulls in Paracas. Here's another skull that we see from Paracas.
Wow.
And
it's awesome. It's so long. It's such a long deformation toward.
Well, it really is. And here's the deal. You'll notice here, again, the complete absence of a sagittal suture. What's interesting is that in 1842, there were archaeologists that were in Peru opening up mummies, looking at these elongated skulls. And just like today, there was this controversy. Well, they were saying that all the skulls are the result of cradle headboarding. Cradle headboarding is when you take an infant and you put a board here and a board there, and you wrap the skull, and it has to be done at a very early age, basically from infancy to about 2 years old, and you shape the skull this way. And we understand that. We understand that some of the skulls have been cradle headboarded, cranial deformation. And Brian Forrester and David Childress have written a book about that.
Yep.
If you're more interested, definitely get it. I cover it in both my books, On the Trail of a Nephilim 1 and On the Trail of a Nephilim Volume 2. Here's what's interesting, and I thank Brian Forrester for showing me this particular 1842 journal. So these 2 archaeologists are there, and this debate is raging between academics. Well, they're all headboarded, and these guys are going, well, look, some of them are cradle headboarded. We understand that, but some of them are not. And this is from the journal. We ourselves have observed the same fact in many mummies of children of tender age, who, although they had cloths about them, were yet without any vestige or appearance of pressure of the cranium. More still, the same formation of the head presents itself in children yet unborn. And of this truth, we have had convincing proof in the sight of a fetus enclosed in the womb of a mummy of a pregnant woman, which we found in a cave in Tarma. And I'll show you 2 things. First of all,
wow.
we unbound the skull of a mummy, of a baby mummy, and this is what we found in Paracas. This is all in Watchers 8, our video. It's also in my book, On the Trail of the Nephilim, Volume 2.
Wow.
You will notice the strawberry blonde hair.
Yep.
That's not supposed to be there, James. We shouldn't. If this fits the Darwinian paradigm of everyone coming over the land bridge, the Bering Strait at the end of the last ice age, what the heck are we doing with this? Where does this come from?
This is
it's
crazy.
strawberry blonde hair. You'll notice that the skull is elongated. And here's the deal. There was a lithograph that was made in 1842 of this elongated skull and I don't have it with me. Rats, I don't have it. But it shows that the skull, this is a cast of that skull that I just showed you the picture of. This is the cast of the baby. Look at the size of this thing.
Wow.
Look at the size of that.
That's not headboarding. That's not headboarding.
That's not headboarding.
That's
and
natural.
We believe that the this particular entry from this journal in 1842 sort of solidifies the idea that there's an outside agency manipulating the genome, which is responsible for these guys.
Yep.
This is not cradle headboarding in our opinion. You'll also notice here the reddish, this is part of the hair that was left on the skull.
Sure.
That's the true color. Look at how reddish auburn it is.
Reddy, coppery red auburn color.
Copper red. And so I'm going to turn on this light. Hopefully we can get some better light here. But James, what's interesting about all this?
It's a paradigm buster. This is paradigm busting, big time.
Oh, it's incredible.
We're actually we're actually living in the time of history being rewritten. It's actually been rewritten at a fast pace now that the old history books are just stagnant, obsolete now.
Well, they are, and there's a reason for it. The Darwinian paradigm has held a lot of people in what I would call intellectual bondage.
Intellectual prison. Yeah, it's an intellectual prison
it's
state.
It's an intellectual prison because you either believe in the Darwinian paradigm, or if you look at anything outside of that, this is what I was looking for. You lose your tenure, you lose your job. Don't believe me? Watch Ben Stein's incredible movie called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, where he interviews people that used to be in academia, tenured professors who lost their job, who were fired for even mentioning the word intelligent design, for even questioning the Darwinian paradigm. This is what's at stake. Wow. And so look, I'm not an archaeologist, but I read a lot of books, and I'm on the trail constantly researching. This is the lithograph from 1842.
Wow.
This is the lithograph. Notice the elongated skull, and the fetus has teeth. The two huge no-nos. So basically what we're looking at here, James, is this. Wow. Notice the elongated skull,
Sure.
the elongated skull, and then the teeth here. Wow. We are looking, in my opinion, at an outside agency that's manipulating the genome. And what's fascinating about this is it ties back into the biblical narrative where the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, the days of the flood, and also afterward, when the sons of God, the fallen angels of heaven, came down and saw the women of earth. And I don't want to clear up something, because a lot of folks, the moment I say fallen angel, they have this preconceived notion of, hark the herald angels sing. It's not what we're talking about here.
Sure.
We are looking at beings that are so, first of all, intelligent and powerful that when they do show up, human beings, for the most part, do a faceplant. We get short-circuited. That's what happens. And it's all across the board. So we have to take this preconceived notion, about Hark the Herald Angels Sings and this little stuff that we learn in Sunday school and in church when we're kids, and throw it out the window. These are highly intelligent, powerful entities which are able to manipulate space, time, matter, and energy down to the cellular, molecular level. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Wow, to touch on the Darwin, I'm no fan of Darwin either. Now, I do believe that Darwinian, in a microevolution, it might be okay for certain things. Certainly for the plants and the trees and everything else. But for the human race, take that out of the equation, because I don't believe Darwinian, and I want to call it the Church of Darwin, because they have a go at the religious doctrines of the world like they're the opposition. However, in my opinion, and I could be wrong with this, but they are more religious in their thoughts, and they're more dogmatic in their beliefs than any other religious doctrine on the planet. And I call them the Church of Darwin, because they really do impose their religious beliefs, and it is like a religion in a way. Now, that may be a crude, sarcastic comment. However, that's just the best way I have to explain it. Now, that's okay. I think, like I say, Darwinian evolution might be okay for plants, animals, and certain other things. However, when you apply it to the human genome, it's just not working. It's just not working out.
Well, even for something as you know, you mentioned plants and animals. I mean, this is what's incredible about it. With the myriad of life that's on the planet, surely we would see some species today transitioning into something else. We don't. We see microevolution, and I agree with Darwin. We see finches' beaks becoming bigger. I get that. Yeah. But the finch is still a finch. And the DNA from a finch is going to produce a finch. It's not going to produce a humpback whale. It's never going to change that way. It's not going to suddenly grow fins and jump in the ocean. It's not going to work that way. If Darwin had known about the deoxyribonucleic double helix of life, the spiral of life, as I finally call it, the DNA coding. And by the way, the co-discoverer of DNA, Watson and Crick. Crick was a vexed man. Crick believed that no matter how, I'm basically quoting here, now how many billions of years of prebiotic sop you got, how much time, there's no way that just even a single strand of protein would form on its own. It can't happen because it's so complex. It's so complex. Look, here's something to think about. We're human beings. We're talking right now. And as we're doing this, James, we're in this little bio bodysuit, you know, and it's working for us. What is consciousness, and how does consciousness integrate with this body? As I'm talking to you, you're breathing, you're not thinking about, well, I'm going to take my next breath. You're not thinking about that. Your heart is pumping blood through your entire system. If it stops, that's called a heart attack, and you immediately drop to the floor, and we call the paramedics. Your eyes are able to do, you're doing 2 or 3 things at once. While you're listening to me, you're watching me on the monitor, and you're also like maybe planning your next question. So you're thinking, you're hearing, thinking, and seeing. How do you hear? How can you understand the words that I'm speaking? What is language? What is consciousness? Where does consciousness seat itself? I mean, this stuff is all metaphysical, and it's just awesome. It's incredible. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. There is a designer, in my opinion. There is a designer, and we can know the designer. That's the whole point of you know, quote unquote religions. But Darwinism is so dogmatic, and I'll tell you an interesting story. There was a tenured professor of archaeology at a major university in the United States. And I spoke to this woman on the phone, and I was telling her, I said, well, what do you think about pictures like this? And this skeleton we estimate to be 9 feet tall. You'll also notice the 6 fingers.
Wow.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
6,
and the thumb is wrapped around the bone up here. Incredible. And this is all on the Trail of a Nephilim Volume 2. What's interesting about this, James, is that when I talked to this woman, I said, how do you account for men of letters in the last century, specifically at the turn of the 19th and the 20th century? How do you account for men of letters stating and measuring giant femur bones and stating that some of these giant skeletons that we unearthed in these mounds all across the Americas were 9, 10, 12 feet in height? You know what her answer was to me? And I'm not making this up. Sure. Men of letters 100 years ago did not know how to measure. Wow. Which is, you want to talk about dogma? And the reason why that person, that tenured professor, has to say that is because if they admit there's a 12-footer, it blows the Darwinian paradigm right out of the water. Sure. And it points back to the supernatural. And in Darwinism, there is no supernatural. Sure. I'm going out on a limb with this one, L.A., but the 6 fingers for me may be, you know, they say 666 and the fallen angels, Satan, whatever you want to call that whole genre of 6. I believe that the numerology, going back to the unit of the foot and the unit of the inch, back to Babylon where it originates, it's all a base 6 number system. And like us humans to do on the planet today, we have a base 10 system. We have 10 digits on our hands and we count 1 to 10. However, if you've got 6 fingers on one hand or 6 digits, why wouldn't you make your base number system 6? And a lot of this gematria that Fritz Zimmermann would go into
with the 666 numerology, I can see why. It's a six-fingered Nephilim biological entity doing this. You know, I can see why there's a 666 numerology there. Maybe there's some sort of a physical reasoning to the sign of 666. That's what I think, personally. I'm going out on the limb with that one, but...
You know, that's very interesting, and it certainly has some merit to it. And Fritz has done just incredible work. I'm going to try to get this fly. I think I got him. Live TV, folks. Gotta love it. Fritz has done just some incredible work. I spent 2 or 3 days with Fritz at a conference several years ago, and he gave me a private tour of the Circle Mound,
Sure.
part of the Octagon Mound. We went to other mounds which had not yet been looked at, and we photographed them. And Fritz writes articles for my news magazine. I quoted him in my books. He wrote a wonderful chapter for On the Trail of the Nephilim, Volume 1.
Sure.
He's a great researcher. And here's something what's interesting. And Fritz and I have both, followed this, and I've talked to Native Americans who have vetted this, that the idea of the 6 fingers, okay, goes back into the Native American oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And the oral tradition of many Native American tribes talk about these red-haired cannibalistic giants that had, in fact, 6 digits, 6 fingers. And the idea of doing this, where Hollywood gets, how?
Yeah.
It's not how. They would hold up the hand and spread their fingers to show that the 6th digit was not there. That's what that's about.
Wow.
And I embedded that specifically with Chief Joseph Riverwind and other Native Americans whom I've spoken with.
Wow. And on top of that, and just to concentrate on Fritz for a second, the Nephilim Chronicles book, I've read them 3 times now. There's so much in it. And I wasn't aware because obviously my part of the world, the British Isles, Britain, Ireland, Scotland, all the place names have the word Og in it. And when he listed them all, I'm like, oh my God. When Og, the king of Bashan, spoken of in biblical sources as being a giant. We even have an old Irish tale called Tir na Og, which means land of Og, believe it or not.
And James, and here's the deal. If I get over to Europe, I'd like to spend some time like in Stonehenge and go to some of these megalithic sites in the area. I mean, I've got the time and the means to do it. But here's something to think about, okay? That in our opinion, the theory that we're going with is that, there was a diaspora, and I don't think I have a picture of it here, but in 3,500 years ago,
sure.
when the Nephilim tribes were in the Levant, in the Promised Land, and we have a list of them. Fritz talks about the Amorites. That's a Nephilim tribe. The Phoenicians are the descendants of the Canaanites, Nephilim tribe.
Yeah.
The Rephaim, the Nephilim, the Zamzumim, all Nephilim tribes. So when Joshua and Caleb and the Israelites, and I've written about this extensively in my book, The Cosmic Chess Match, but when they go into what is known as the Promised Land, or now Israel,
mm-hmm.
the Nephilim are there. And the mandate comes down to wipe them all out. Why do you wipe them all out? Because they're hybrids. They're never supposed to be here. They're hybrid creations between the fallen angels of heaven and the women of earth. And guess what? When Joshua and Caleb start doing this, there's a diaspora. They begin to flee. Og was in the northern part of what is now Israel, mm-hmm. near Mount Hermon, Og of Bashan. It's actually very close to where the Golan Heights are today.
Yeah.
So we believe that the giants began to flee. Some went northward into Europe, into England, and then out and around, Greenland, Iceland, Nova Scotia, and into the Americas. Others built boats and sailed out the Mediterranean and wound up in the Gulf of Mexico. Thora Heyerdahl proved that this could be done in a papyrus boat, and the book is called Ra. The best known one is Kon-Tiki. You can do this. Ancients could have done this. And we also believe that some of these settled in and around the Gulf of Mexico. Others, perhaps, built boats again and sailed out the Red Sea into the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and came over that way. The Paracas people, which I talk about, show up in Paracas, Peru, 3,500 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
3,500 years ago. Guess what? That fits the timeline of the conquest of Canaan absolutely perfectly. And James, if I come over, we have to go to some of these places that you just discussed that talk about, that have the name Og in them. Because I believe as the tribes are leaving, Og did not leave. Og was killed. It says in the biblical text, Og was the last of the giants. So his people fled. He stayed and remained. And we know that his bedstand was made of iron, and it was at least 13 feet long. Og was probably a 12-footer. So they're making all these places all through England, Scotland, Ireland. I'd love to see them that are called that pay tribute back to Og, King of Bashan. There's something going on there, and thank you, Fritz Zimmerman, for alerting us to it.
Yeah, wow, it's mind blowing, LA. It's absolutely mind blowing.
It absolutely is mind blowing.
It even gets better than that, because a lot of the Nephilim architecture that Fitz concentrated on, the henges, they got a lot of geometry in them and a lot of numerology. And I've got an article coming out on a lot of the numerology. You know, I'm a megalithic guy, and this was the last thing that I want to look at. I mean, I want to look at engineering. I want to look at astronomy, and I'm very sanitized in my thoughts, LA, up until about a year ago, because now I realize who's behind all this. And the Nephilim architecture, you're now looking at a race of genetic hybrids that have biblical references. There's archaeological evidence of these guys, and we even have some of their numerology encoded in it's like there's so much evidence now, and it's all coming together. It's all been synthesized. It's amazing. It's totally amazing.
You know, James, it is. And what's interesting about this, we have these sites. You know, you talk about geometry. This is a place in near Lake Titicaca on the border of Peru and Bolivia. Mm-hmm. This is called the Silistani Towers. Look at the little girl. Look at Jillian right here. And look at this tower. It is narrower at the bottom, and it fans out like this at the top. Okay?
Incredibly hard to do.
It'd be impossible to do. And the whole tower is in a circle. Let me show you another picture of it. And again, look at the joints here.
It's amazing. Wow.
And this is made out of basalt. And once again, it begs the question, how does a Neolithic culture, thousands of years ago, create this? There's not one stone is the same. Check this out.
Wow. Look at that. It's amazing.
And so what we've got here is, as the tower is being built, let me move this outside here so you don't hear it. Live TV, folks. Sorry about that.
You're all right, fella. Live TV, as you say.
As the tower is being built like this, okay? And it's a circle. You know, the tower is a circle, okay? Like this water bottle. But in a circle, it's smaller at the bottom, so it's flaring out, which means every single stone that is placed there, okay? The radius is changing as it goes up. Are you kidding me? It is the most, this edifice right here, let me get a better picture of it. This is one of the most complex structures you could possibly ever hope to make, right there, the Silistani Tower.
Sure. Do you think, LA, that they're showing off with their intellectual prowess? That's the playfulness.
Absolutely. They do it, James, because they can.
They do
because it's no sweat to them. They're not going, oh my gosh, we got to make a tower like this. They're just going, no problem. And they've got the means and the technology to do it. Remember, these entities, in my opinion, can manipulate space, time, matter, and energy. This is nothing for them. Yeah. Can they levitate? Absolutely. Can they levitate the rocks? I believe they were levitated. That's how it was done, in my opinion. Because they deal in a different physics. Let me tell you what I mean. Okay.
Sure.
Let me give you like a proof text. And this is going to get a little woo for some of your audience. For others, they'll know exactly where I'm going. In the UFO abduction phenomena, okay, what we have, and I'm going to use a little prop here. I'll use Swiper, the cartoon figure. Okay.
Yep.
Swiper is laying in bed. Here's the bed. Swiper's in bed. Okay. Classic abduction. All of a sudden, he realizes there are entities in the room around him, and he begins to panic. But this is where we're not in Kansas anymore. These entities, he realizes he's paralyzed. He then is floated above the bed, and then floated, sometimes turned like this, upright, and then floated, excuse me, out through the window.
Sure.
What we're looking at here, thanks, Swiper, what we're looking at is Dr. Jacobs calls future physics. And if it was done now, this is what's another incredible link between what was done in antiquity and what's happening in modernity. These entities can take a person. Granted, it's not 120 tons. I get it. It's not a megalithic rock. But they have no trouble levitating that person and passing that person through a closed window. That is impossible. You can't do that. You can't do it. The window would break. We are looking at future physics. And that's why when we look at, when we hear about the UFO abduction phenomenon, what's going on there, and then we look at the Solistani Towers or Sacsayhuamán Mine that we talked about earlier, in my opinion, there's a definite connection between what happened in antiquity and what is going on right now in modernity.
Mm-hmm. You know, even let's go to Egypt as well. Perhaps, you know, people say, why would there be so much information encoded in the pyramid? You're talking the mathematics, the phi ratio, the value of pi, its angles, everything. There's giant blocks as well. I mean, because they had the knowledge to do it, and it was like,
they could do it.
Why not put everything in there? And I just extend that now to all these other architectures. The more Giza might be the pinnacle in terms of an architectural feat.
Giza for me is the pinnacle. I would agree with that.
Sure.
Giza's the pinnacle.
You know, actually, on Egypt, you may or may not be aware of this, but there was an article wrote about a 1,000,000 mummy cemetery.
I saw that.
I'm not entirely sure now that there was 1,000,000 mummies there, because whoever mentioned there was 1,000,000 mummies was fired, and there's a whole controversy, but there's at least several thousand. One of the mummies was over 7 foot tall, LA.
I saw that too.
And they were able to group them into genetic groups of blonde-haired, red-haired, and others. What's going on with that, LA?
Yeah, and you know what? Notice how that's been buried, and all that information is like, whoop, don't be looking here. And this is what we get. This is why, James, this is why it's so important, the research that we do. Let me tell you something. That we've got 2 samples of DNA which came out of the country illegally. One was taken by Lloyd Pye 4 or 5 years ago, and we've spoken to the geneticist. The other one was done by some UK television network, which saw the Waikiki mummy and took DNA sample out of that. The Waikiki sample said the mitochondrial DNA was human, but the nuclear DNA was not, and outside any of the genome. These skulls in Paracas, and one sample from a late Lloyd Pye was tested. This is what the geneticist says. Whatever the sample label, I'm reading this from my other monitor, whatever the sample label 3A has come from, it had mitochondrial DNA with mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. The data is very sketchy, though. A lot of sequencing still needs to be done to recover the complete mitochondrial DNA sequence. But a few fragments I was able to sequence from this sample indicate that if these mutations will hold, we are dealing with a new human-like creature, very distant from Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, Denisovans, and I am not sure it will even fit into the known evolutionary tree.
Wow.
Denisovans. I always have trouble saying that for whatever reason. Denisovans. And then it goes breeding within their small populations. They may have degenerated due to inbreeding. This is huge. It's preliminary DNA, but what is it doing? It's so far validating our hypothesis that there's an outside agency that's manipulating the genome. There's an outside agency manipulating the genome. Look at the eye sockets. Are you kidding me? Look at the eye sockets, how huge they are. That's not normal, folks. It's not normal. This baby was about 18 months old. And it came from the Changos necropolis in Peru. And let me show you that one other picture of it again. So the picture is just incredible. It's just, I mean, you look at this stuff and it's just, it's just mind-boggling, really. Here we go. Thank you, Senior Juan. These are the gallery. This is all these pictures I'm showing you are from On Betrayal of a Nephilim Volume 2.
Wow.
Look at that.
That's incredible, Alec.
I mean, and James, we got to go, my team got to go down and unwrap that skull.
Really?
I mean, that's like a first. Are you kidding me? We had Aaron Judkins, an archaeologist, Joe Taylor, who did the incredible casting here. Chase Klotze was our forensic field investigator. She supplied all of our forensic material, gloves, bags. I mean, everything was done. Senior Juan, Brian Forrester, helped arrange all this thing. And anyway, was our interpreter, Richard Shaw, my business partner, filmed all this for Watchers 8. I mean, it's groundbreaking stuff. It's absolutely groundbreaking stuff.
Tell me a little bit about Peru, LA. Is Peru open to this idea, Nephilim, outside influence, alternative history, if you want to call it that? Because we know Egypt's got a stranglehold on it. And, you know, UK, everything else, all the rest of the world seems to have this, like, conspiracy around universities or museums or influence of archaeology. I just won't go there, but is Peru kind of open to all this stuff? Are they? No.
They are and they aren't. They definitely toe the Darwinian paradigm. And in order to do anything, you've got to have an archaeologist won't do. The archaeologist has to be tied to a university. And so all the information is controlled. Yeah. I can't stress that enough. And the system is global. Okay. It's a controlled system. And we're working with several archaeologists and trying to get permits to do a real archaeological dig in the Chongos necropolis where this skull came from. And also we're trying to get material out to do proper DNA testing.
I wanted to mention the Dead Sea Scrolls, LA. I was reading up a little bit on today for this show. Do we have a source of the Nephilim in there?
Yeah, we do actually. It's interesting you should mention that.
Just for the audience, the Dead Sea, the Book of Enoch. The Dead Sea Scrolls, obviously found in 1947. We weren't aware of anything, half the stuff that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls we weren't aware. Some of it we were, some of it is everyday living, but then there's also stuff relating to the Bible, and it's like extra excerpts, if you want to call it that. But we do have a reference to the Apocryphon, is it the Apocryphon Genesis book?
The Genesis Apocrypha, but the Book of Enoch is quoted 70 times in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Yeah. It's alluded to several times in the New Testament, the Christian New Testament. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is the Genesis 6 passage and the Enochian passage, they mirror each other. Listen what it says. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied in those days, were born unto them beautiful daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them and said to one another, and it goes on from there. And basically it lists the angels, tells you where they came down. And then when we go to the book of Genesis in the Hebrew, and we go to the 6th chapter there, the texts almost mimic each other. Listen to this. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of the Elohim saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took women of all they chose. And then it says the Nephilim were on the earth. What's interesting about the book of Enoch, while it's not part of the canon, it was actually referenced again 70 times. Yeah. At least 70 times in the Tanakh. The church fathers referenced this book. It's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can at least appreciate its historicity. And what this does, the book of Enoch, and why it's so controversial, is it amplifies the Genesis 6 passage. Sure. It makes it very clear as to what's going on there. And what's going on there is the fallen angelic hosts of heaven are messing with the genome to create a hybrid being known as the Nephilim. And this is, look, in Genesis 3 we read that there's 4 people in this scene. There's the Most High God, there's the fallen cherub, commonly known as Satan, Adam and Eve. And the Most High God's addressing everybody and saying, pointing to the serpent, your seed, Mr. Satan, your seed will be at enmity, at war with the seed of the woman. This sets up the rest of history. Mm-hmm. Because that's what's going on today with the abduction phenomena and the so-called implant and breeding program. And it's what went on in Genesis 6 with the flood, before the flood, and also afterwards, and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. By the way, this baby has been carbon dated. We carbon dated some of the mummy wrappings here, 2,000 years old. Wow. 2,000 years old. Wow. That's the end of the Paracas culture. It's incredible.
The good thing for me is, LA, that before the Dead Sea Scrolls, things were very different. Now that we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1947, it vindicates the book of Genesis. It vindicates it and saying, well, look, okay, we have another source now. And it amplifies it, as you say. Not only does it vindicate it, but it amplifies it with extra text. This is incredible for me. And I think the Dead Sea Scrolls do not get enough attention. They just do not get enough attention. And I just think it's so wonderful to have a second source, because it just puts people, with their opinions to bed. Like, keep your opinions out of this. This is something that we have now to vindicate this. And it's just a wonderful, there's so much research gone into the Dead Sea Scrolls. I just don't see enough people talking about them. I really don't.
Well, but the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually held captive by the intellectuals.
Wow.
Until Biblical Archaeology Review basically went in and photographed them all and then published them all. And that caused this huge uproar. Oh my gosh. Look, they're saying you guys are sitting here with 1 page of text and you won't publish it. And you've had 50 years to do it. We've had it up to here. And this is the problem with academics.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to, there's a lot of great academics out there that do great work. But a lot of these guys sit around and do absolutely nothing and won't publish and take years. And this is why Biblical Archaeology Review said, we've had it. We're going to disseminate these scrolls, this information, and let other scholars work on them. They hold the information. I publish everything. I don't hold anything back.
Yeah.
The preliminary DNA evidence is in the book. The unwrapping of the baby skull is in the book. The carbon-14 dating is not in the book, but it will be in volume 3.
Sure.
And on we go.
What is it about? Well, I know that there was a group of scholars, the biblical canon was wrote down of 3rd, 4th century, I'm not sure, something like that. But there was a choice made to leave out the Enochian part of the Bible. Why was that choice taken? Was it a hot potato back then? Was it too much for people?
This is a hot button argument, and people will argue vociferously on both sides. Here's what's interesting. This is a very new translation. It's called Sefer, Sefer.
Yep.
And what's interesting about that, they have included the book of Enoch.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
And in the beginning of the book, this particular translation of the Bible, they make a defense. They talk about what happened to the books and the book of Enoch. And this is, I posted this on my blog. You would think that they were ready to, some people were ready to drag me out in the parking lot, burn me at the stake, just for mentioning this.
Sure.
And there's a whole group of people, King James only, King James only. Well, I get it. And I read, the King James is a great translation. What did people do before 1611? Number one. And what did people do before the Geneva Bible? Number two. And number three, the King James Bible, the 1611 edition, had the Apocrypha in it. It was there. Now, they weren't saying it was canon, but why can't we read the book of Enoch? What are these people protesting? And certainly it's a secondary source. I don't view it as a canon, the scripture, but it's certainly something that we can at least draw from. And it also provides great clarity. And as you said, it vindicates, it validates the Genesis 6 story, which is why we use it.
Yeah. I think for me as well, what I like about all this is it's tangible. It's now something that wasn't tangible for me growing up, that there's some sort of realism or tangible, and I think that's what attracts most people to this now. Even people that aren't biblical or religious in any way, there's still archaeology there for them. So I like to have, I like a complex story. The more complex it is, and the more areas of research I have, the better, and that's important for me. But I think what's so tangible now is that we have also other stuff about prophecy, and that these Nephilim will return. Let's talk a little bit about the prophetic nature of this. I know you talk about this on the trail of the Nephilim too. Maybe just bring in a little bit of prophecy, Ellie, because this is important too.
Well, you've got this God-man walking around on the planet 2,000 years ago, and his name was called Yeshua. That's his name. Most people know him by Jesus. And unfortunately, for the last 2,000 years, it's gotten to the part where people walk into the Anglican Church and they look at the guy with the robes, or they look at the Catholic Church with the robes and and the statues and the incense and the candles and the mass and the ceremony and confessionals and pageantry and all this stuff. It has nothing to do with anything. Nothing to do with anything. You have the God-man, and I believe he was fully God and fully man, Yeshua, walking around 2,000 years ago. Guess what he says? He says a prophecy. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing, when I return, when the Son of Man, he calls himself, refers to himself on occasion as the Son of Man. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like the days of Noah. Whoa! Whoa! Remember, this is 2,000 years ago. There is no Christianity. There is no church. There is no PR firm. There's one man walking around on the planet with a few disciples, few other guys who are kind of going, yeah, this guy's really cool. He's doing all this amazing stuff. And he was. He was healing people. Look, if you had leprosy, and you walked up to Yeshua, guess what? He breathed on you. He would just touch you, and you'd watch your body become whole. If you were blind from birth, the eyes would suddenly form. What are we looking at here? How is it possible for him to do that? Walking on the water. I mean, people say that there's no humor in the Bible. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Here's one story, okay?
Sure.
It's late at night, or it's in the afternoon, and they're by the Sea of Galilee. Yeshua's there, the disciples are there, and some of you have heard the story, but check it out. Check it out. And Yeshua goes, "Hey guys, hop in the boat, set sail. I'll catch up with you later." Where's the first clue that something is really wrong with this statement? What do you mean you'll catch up with us later? What, do you got a speedboat 2,000 years ago? How are you going to catch up with us later? Right? So that's bizarre. So they're out there and they're rowing on the Sea of Galilee. And Yeshua waits until it starts to get dark. And then he just decides to take a stroll on the water. Now, the gentle Jesus that we all learn about in Sunday school would be going, "Hey guys, it's me. I'm coming to you. I'm walking on the water. Please don't get freaked out. Don't worry." No, it's not what he does. He walks on the water, and he walks near the boat, but not really close to it. The guys in the boat completely freak out. It's a ghost. Oh my God. Because they've never seen anybody walk on the water before. They are totally freaked out. And there's humor in there. And what we see is he's always doing that. He's always bumping up against the disciples and stretching them. And it's laughable. I mean, it's his way of kind of goofing on them in modern terms, but that's what he's doing. So the prophecy is, he says, it'll be like the days of Noah when I return. And that begs the question, what differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in all of history? And that is the presence of the fallen host of heaven, these malevolent angelic entities coming to earth, having sex with the women, and creating what I believe is a hybrid being known as the Nephilim. And that begs the question, are we seeing that today in modernity? The short answer to that is, because I know we're getting close to the end here, is yes. In the alien abduction phenomena, people are taken. If you're a man, sperm is taken. If you're a female, ovum is taken. And later on, with the women, they're re-abducted. The fetus is then taken from them. We're working on several cases with this right now where we think we may have physical proof of this, but we don't know yet. We'll see where it all goes. And this mirrors the Genesis 6 account. Yeah. It mirrors it. Yeah. And there's another prophecy in the book of Daniel, which says in the time, their seed, there's that seed word again, will mingle with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to them. The word cleave is the same word we see in Genesis that talks about marriage, where the angels came and married the women. That's not what it says. Their seed will cleave, but there was no marriage ceremony. This is precisely what we see in present day with the abduction phenomena. There's sex going on, but there's no marriage going on. So there's two prophecies written thousands of years apart. Well, not thousands, about 500 years apart. One from the book of Daniel, one from Yeshua 2,000 years ago, about 500 years apart in history. No collusion between them, and yet they're pointing to this end time scenario, which we see, in my opinion, being fulfilled right now.
LA, just to wrap things up, we're at the top of the hour. You have a magazine, PP&S, Politics, Prophecy and the Supernatural. Tell us about that, LA. It looks fascinating. It's a monthly magazine. You can catch that on your website. Tell us a little bit about the politics. I presume that's because that's where the prophecy is going to show up.
Yeah, it's politics, prophecy, and the supernatural. We've got a lot of people that write for it. I just give you an idea of some of the people that write. We've talked about Fritz Zimmerman. Fritz contributes very often, almost on a monthly basis.
Excellent.
Aaron Junkins, Nanlita Henson, Mark Kahn, Tony Kale, Doug Woodworth, Richard Shaw, Casper McLeod, and others. And of course, I do interviews every month with different people, and we post the interview. It's just some riveting, up-to-date information. You can get it for $2 a month.
It's nothing.
And, yeah, I mean, it's an e-magazine. It comes as a PDF. You open it up and you go from there. What's interesting is there's a byline, politics, prophecy, and the supernatural, and basically the coming Luciferian, deception. And this is what we think is coming. And there's a line that we use, and it says this, that the current political landscape,
Sure.
is in direct correlation to supernatural events that happened in some cases millennia ago. What do I mean by that? Look at France last week.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it's all based on the supernatural events of this guy called Mohammed, supposedly incarnating and having the angel Gabriel dictate the Quran to him and starting Islam. These people are reacting to a set of supernatural events that happened 1,300 years ago.
Sure.
That's what's going on. And it's global. And so the present political landscape is in direct correlation to supernatural events that happened in some cases millennia ago. And it's not talked about, but that's the root of everything that's going on here has a supernatural origin, in my opinion.
L.A., I really thank you for your time today. If you just hold up a copy of your book, if you hold up a copy of your book just for the listeners to see there, L.A., of course, lamarzulli.net, for the author's blog, and you can catch everything you do there. L.A., really thank you for your time today. Such a prolific researcher, and
thank you. Appreciate it, James.
I really do. Thank you for your time, L.A.
Thank you.